No, Todd, not now!
Hello and welcome back inside the Parc Fermé for podcast number 764. This is Todd.
No, Todd, not now!
AKA Negative Camber. You know why I've asked you
You
here.
must convince the villagers that I'm harmless.
That's exactly what I need you to do. Tonight, for your kind consideration, we're going to cover some news in Formula One and, other shenanigans. That's what we do. It's no races. We're not reviewing races, so we talk about news. But of course, before doing that, I have to introduce my guest. And you know what that means, folks. I have to go all the way to the right coast of our nation, nestled in our nation's capital, where she sits at someone else's house, continuing to dog sit for going on a full week. And at this rate, with the weather, she could be there for 2 weeks. Who knows? It's the lovely, the redoubtable
Grace!
Grace, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah, we're supposed to get six inches. It started out this morning 1 to 3. Now they're calling 6. Who knows what we'll actually have by tomorrow? But
That's a lot of snow.
it is a lot of snow, especially when today it was like 60 degrees and I wore a sweatshirt all day. Right? Like it'll be fun. So I'm still here.
Yeah.
Someday
good.
I'll get back to my new setup. So. Flip
Right.
worked very hard to get me a new mic and a new light and a whole setup, and
Yeah.
I've used it once.
Just once. I know.
But as I told him, I'm like, we're on like what 764.
Yes.
I think it'll get used. Like I don't foresee us stopping anytime soon. So I think 2 podcasts without the new setup, nobody will know. It'll be all
It's
right.
like, when you're little, it's like, okay, little Grace, she wants to play guitar. All right, let's just get an inexpensive guitar because we don't know how long she's going to stick with this whole
That's
thing.
right.
And let's not spend a fortune on, let's not go out and buy a Martin D35 here. Let's just get a cheap guitar. If she really sticks with it, then we can go get a nice guitar.
Yeah.
But after 764 episodes, maybe a nice mic is in order.
Yeah, for sure.
Why not?
I mean, he definitely felt that way. So
Yeah.
I was the one that was like, oh, okay, sure. I just saw it as more things to take up space on my desk. So
Yeah, well, that it is.
and it is. So
Yeah, it certainly
fun.
is.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, hey, let's get some news, man. That's why we're here. So I wanted to talk about, first up, hattipmotorsport.com. They had an article about Lando Norris and some comments he made in the press. And look, there's no doubt entering F1 as a teenager has to be a very daunting task. And I think you could simply ask people like Max Verstappen, Daniel Kvyat, Chris Amon, Fernando Alonso, Ricardo Rodriguez, Jaime Alguersuari, remember him?
Yeah.
Lance Stroll, and finally Lando Norris. The pressure to perform is massive, even for veterans like Kimi, Lewis, Valtteri, Daniel, Sergio, etc. But they're older. They've had more career curveballs thrown at them. They've had to navigate, and they've moved to different teams. They've had time to navigate their careers. For these young guys that are coming to the sport, it's a little different for a young guy to come into the sport, or a young driver like Lando to navigate the demands. And we've seen the pressure it can have. You don't have to look much further than Kvyat, Ocon, Albon, Gasly, right? And you could see the pressure of these guys. Albon and Gasly is a very tangible example of that, and most recently, where that pressure at Red Bull was just overwhelming. And so we've seen that. But Lando is right with them. And he suggested this year that the pressure was very, very difficult, and the thought of losing his ride was overwhelming, and it was a lot to cope with mentally. And so that's why he admitted in the press in a story that he had sought some external help in managing that pressure and mental health. And his candor in the press has been met with quite an outpouring of messages of support from fans who, as one would expect, are struggling with their own lives and own mental health challenges, right? And I don't know that that's why Lando brought that up necessarily, like he was trying to be some sort of, a leader of those that are struggling with the pressures and stresses that come along with living, so to speak. But in his case, I think he was just candid and admitted it.
Yeah.
And look, I'm a father of two school-age daughters. One's 17, one's 20, and they're thereabouts with Lando. And I've seen firsthand what pressure like lockdowns and COVID has done to them, and I've seen that impact it's had on their friends. Thousands of social media people on social media explaining the mental health challenges that they're facing. So Lando's comments, I think, really resonated with a younger fan base of F1. And he said he's been really pleased that, he's been able to help. He said, quote, "I'm very happy to see more people speaking out about it and realizing it's only going to benefit them and benefit others. I don't think there is any negative for doing so. I think it's only going to help you in getting better. And certainly it's going to help if you have a big following or a lot of people watching you when you say it. You're only going to help people who are also struggling. I'm very happy and proud to be part of that group of people who have accepted it and are happy and confident to speak out about it," he said. "One of the biggest things that made me think it was good to speak out about it is my fans and my followers, and especially when I would hint at it the first few times. Before I was even speaking about it publicly, a few of them were saying how much it was helping them and the impact that I can have on them. Then over time, realizing that the impact I can have on hundreds of thousands of people is huge. When I start to get messages of me helping them out to make them feel much better, or their friends or family, that's a pretty amazing thing to see. So the more I saw that, the more I realized the impact that I can have and the place that I am in with Formula One in my life. With the followers that I have and the fan base that I have means the bigger and bigger impact. Therefore, I thought it was better to speak out about it more publicly and worldwide to try to help as many people as possible," end quote.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think that we often talk about the negatives of social media, right? The doom scrolling and but I think as I've spoken to here, here's a place where, as much as I've talked about how, when we first started doing this podcast, we found each other because you were the only other person I could find to talk to, right?
Right.
And now you have millions of people to talk to, right, about Formula One in a way that we didn't before. And so there's real positives to having that kind of reach with people that you didn't necessarily have before, and in an honest, unfiltered kind of way. And so I think that the more that Lando Norris or other athletes, I think of, Naomi Osaka, or I think of like Kevin Love in basketball. I think the more people are able to say, hey, your brain, it's another muscle. It's another part of your body. We have to be concerned about this. There has to be parity between physical and mental health. And the more people speak out about it, there's only good that comes from it, because I think we all feel isolated. And this is one way to feel not isolated, right? How relieving must that be to even just for a moment, I know how that's been, like, even just like, oh my God, I'm so exhausted by the day. And somebody else goes, I know that really is hard for me too. And you go, it is. Oh, okay. At least, in this moment, whatever this issue is, I don't feel alone. And that speaks volumes, and it can help people, make the next step, to find help, or to talk to somebody, or build a support network, or to make a plan. Like, there's so many other things, but that first step has to be that connection that is, I'm not alone. Other people feel this way too. And, I was thinking as you were talking about Lando Norris's experience, I remember Charles Barkley once spoke that he said, all basketball players struggle in their first year because you just spend your first year just trying to figure out what the heck is going on.
Yeah,
right. Because all of a sudden you went from college where you were top dog to now you're in with the adults, right, with children and lives, and you were with your friends that were exactly like you before. And so that change has to be the same in Formula One, that you went, all of a sudden it's like you're in a bigger team, you're hanging out with adults there, it's a totally different change of existence. You're traveling more, because even though he would have traveled in the lesser series, it's not like in Formula One, people recognize you, like all these things. I always joke about the Jensen Button years, right? Like, every driver has those first few years where they're just trying to sort out how to be 20 and live and be in Formula One at the same time. So I'm glad that he's open about it. And I think, as I said before, I hope that kids now have a better handling on it. Cause I know when I was a kid, you were just told, like, suck it up. I see that tear, suck it in, push it down, keep moving forward. And that, where did that get any of us? Nowhere. So have those tears, be out loud. It's okay. Don't just keep shoving it in further down.
Yeah. It is kind of a different, you talk about social media and the dichotomy of social media. And it is interesting because, and I'm not the target audience or the demographic for much of the Gen Z influencers or, millennial influencers by any stretch of imagination. I'm beyond that. But when I do look at all this, you've got all of these people out there. There's a couple different views of this. You've got people that take thousands of selfies in order to pick the perfect angle, the perfect
Yeah, that's
one,
crazy. Right.
And they're sponsored, they get free product, they're influencers, so to speak, and their whole job is to post perfect imagery of their lives and of themselves and present what I would consider a pretty false narrative about who they are in a lot of ways. And because at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure when they go to the bathroom, you use toilet paper like the rest of us.
Right.
So, if you're looking for a grand equalizer, there it is. So on the flip side of it, I find that a lot of that, there's a ton of that. And, you look at impressionable young men, impressionable young women, and everything in between. And you look at the impact that has in this perfect life. Grace, you remember when you and I were younger, it was always about the models on Cosmo, their size zeros, and this is an impossible image to present to young teenage girls, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got a lot of that. But I think it's unique in that when people come out like Lando and others that have 1 million followers or more, and they come out not presenting this perfect concept of who they are in life, when he comes out and says, you know what, mentally I struggled a lot with the pressure on this, and I think that's what people resonate with. It's look, people are resonating with influencers because influencers are paid a lot of money to do what they do, and I get that, but I think the more genuine connection are those connections with like Lando or George or Charles or whoever it might be in the younger driver category that are just a little more candid about who they are, their positive traits, their flaws, the things they struggle with. People like that genuine presentation of who they are. And so anyway, yeah, I think that's resonated. And I was thinking the other day, Grace, you remember a couple years ago, I think we talked about this on the podcast. A few years ago, Sir Jackie Stewart was, he was best known as being really a champion of safety in Formula One for all the right reasons, because through his efforts and the tireless efforts of those with him, they revolutionized the sport's safety.
Right.
And that's very true. But a few years ago, Jackie came out and he was very vocal about, it was like when Jenson Button was coming in and Kimi Räikkönen, these younger and younger drivers, and Lewis Hamilton in particular. And I think the conversation came up early on in Lewis's career, and he became very vocal about drivers needing coaches for both driving and for mental health and focus, given the immense pressures that they are under. But this was met with a lot of either negative reactions or complete dismissal. And he has still maintained that position to this day. And I remember reading some of the comments by the young drivers themselves. No, I don't need that. I don't need a sports psychologist. I don't need all that crap and blah, blah, blah. And then I watched Lewis had 2 or 3, kind of challenging personal years in his personal life with his dad and his breakup with Nicole and those kind of things that certainly weighed on him. And I think, Jackie was sort of dismissed on that. Now, fast forward until now, and I think, now, I think if you fast forward now, you look at Lando embracing getting outside help to assist him in managing that pressure that he's under. We saw a complete change in Lando in 2020 from his sort of impish, boyish behavior in 2019. And it's led to a real advance in his racecraft, in his performance on track, his focus off track and car development. Everything he's doing on track, as well as the way he's managing himself off track, it's tangible just how effective that assistance has been for him. And given that he had this new teammate in the shape of Daniel Ricciardo, who is no one's chump, he
Right.
needed this help to make sure that, he could hang with Dan, right? Because very few can. So I just thought it was refreshing. And I just wanted to remind folks, if you're newer to Formula One, Sir Jackie was the first one I know that was really strongly pushing this several years ago, was summarily dismissed. And that's unfortunate because it's kind of like what, this is kind of just parlaying along with what you were saying, is that, everyone has a dragon that they're fighting. And sometimes it's good to see that you're not alone and that others fight similar dragons in their own lives, right?
Yep.
And I believe there were about 3 years in Lewis's career that I can think of that, he may have really benefited from a driver coach or a life coach to help
Yeah.
sort of navigate that pressure he was under
Yeah.
at McLaren, and then all of that fame that just seemingly, instantly was thrown at him, right?
I just think I mean, we talked about it last week that, and I said, everybody needs an Angela. Everybody
Yeah.
needs an Angela, right? Like, I think just even having, being married, having a spouse that I know that when I'm not having a great day, I can go, oh my God, this happened today. And Flip goes, okay, so I'll make dinner, or I'll go, you know what I mean? Like, you have that other person that, always has your back, right?
Right.
I don't, when I was single, I wasn't that long ago, you don't necessarily know who that person is, right? And what friends you can trust or somebody like that. So yeah, Angela's an employee, right? He's somebody but the idea that, especially at that level, that he can go to Angela and just be like, yo, I'm having a bad day. And she'd be like, okay, yo, let's do this thing about it. Whereas you have to have somebody that has your back, because otherwise that person can go, hey, guess what? Lewis is having a bad day, right? Sorry, I should have done that this way. Anyway, Lewis is having a bad day. And now it's all like media fodder, and that's not really going to help either. And so I think just having a trusted confidant, somebody that can help you. Sometimes I think we've all been in that situation too, where you're just like overwhelmed because all of a sudden, like, the phone's ringing, the dog's barking, the kids need something, you're supposed to be working, you're supposed to be doing these things, and you're just like, I can't handle all of this. And it's helpful to have somebody else just go, okay, let's take 5 breaths, make a list, figure out what's important. We're going to get through this together. So I think that we often forget that, just like you have to stretch before you run, right? You stretch your legs, or you don't just like start running, you'll get a cramp, right? Our brains are the same way. Our mental existence is the same way. And that, and why we all have varying degrees of physical, I'm not a marathon runner, but I still have to stretch. And, knock on wood, very, very lucky to not have mental health issues, but everybody's had leg cramps, and everybody has, mental moments that we just all need help with. I just think, again, to think that we're all an island. And I think, and so when you're talking about Jackie Stewart, I think a lot of that came from, I should be able to do it myself. And I think, I don't know, maybe that's a very American thing. I don't know how other countries feel about it, but we have this very sense of like, I don't need help. I don't need to ask for help. Help is weakness. I can do this myself. Why, look. And then I think that's always the other thing, is that you look around and you go, well, I see Todd, he's doing it by himself. I really have no idea. Right. Because what we only see is the tip of somebody's iceberg. I only know
you
what
only
you
see
show
one
me.
picture out of the 1,000 selfies that someone's taking.
And I think we've all been in that situation where you like find out much later that somebody's mom was sick, or they're, like these other things that are below the water for their other iceberg that you just didn't know about.
You didn't know. That's right.
And you were like, all right, I just always need to be kind to people. Or I always need to think like, okay, Todd's not having a great day today. Maybe I'll have this conversation with him tomorrow, because I don't know what else is going on under the water, because I only see the tip. And so I think I think these are the kind of things that we all want to think that we can just do this by ourselves and we don't need ourselves. And of course, that's how we see sports figures, right? We see these men and women as, I think Serena Williams is another example of this, right? She's gone through a lot of, mental and physical struggles, and we want her to succeed because we love watching her play tennis, right? We love watching these drivers drive. And so we want them to be successful, but they are human beings, and we need to keep that in mind too. And that they have the right to say, yo, I can't, or I need these things, or I need help, or something else. So I think it's easy for us as fans to sometimes want them to be something other than just a human.
Yeah, right. And I was thinking about this. I was thinking, well, what about if I looked at the grid? I don't know. I'm not implying that they do. I'm just saying, having kind of watched their careers, I would think that like Albon, Gasly, I think even Yuki and Nikita could use some driver coaching, life coaching on how to cope, because this isn't just their first job selling shoes at Tom McCann in a mall.
Right.
It's the world stage, and the stakes are as high as they will ever be in motorsport. Right?
And your family isn't necessarily equipped for this, right? I mean, I guess it's true for all of us as humans too, is that, some parents or siblings or whoever's in your family might be able to help you with this, but for some people, this is not, your family just not going to cut it as that person for you.
Right. Because it happens everywhere. You think like many years ago, when Anthony Hamilton was really navigating Lewis's career for him and managing him and all those things, and everything he did and sacrificed to get Lewis to where he was a noble charter by anyone's measure. But once they got there, and at 13, I think when Ron handed him a contract, but once they got there and started making the money and everything, it was one thing for Lewis to navigate that at such a tender age, but as you're saying, you'd think, well, parents, are they equipped for that? I remember as the money, kind of started flowing in, and all that stuff, and then Anthony wrapped his Porsche around a bush and a playground of children, and things get a little out of hand back then, And it isn't easy to navigate whether you're Lewis or his dad. I think those are difficult situations. And so to your point, even you think, well, my dad can. Well, in that case, if you think of like Max and his dad, Nico and his dad, they've been in F1 and they know the Piranha Club real well, so they may have been able to coach them a little better than, say, Albon's dad or Gasly's dad or Yuki's dad or whatever it might be, or mom or whoever is important. I think in Albon's life is his mom. And sister. But if you think about that, I kind of feel like if there's inspiration to take from Lando, it's that whatever dragon you're fighting, chances are many others have fought the same beast. And there's nothing wrong with naming it and seeking help in tackling the dragon and wrestling it to the ground. Because, as I've found over the years, that if you fight the dragon too long, you become the dragon. And I think in this case, I think addressing these things, and I think Lando has done a great job of being real candid. So I thought it was an interesting story. We haven't talked about it on the podcast yet, and I remember when he started talking about it, and with all the racing going on and everything, I just didn't have a place to talk about it. So anyway, I thought it was important to bring up.
Yeah, and I think that. Speaking of Yuki, I think we talked about this last week too. I think that once Albon was there and able to coach him, that was huge help too, right? I mean,
just like with Vettel and Mick Schumacher, right?
Yes, correct. I think, I just think that knowing that person has your back, right? That you don't have to question where this information goes. It ends with Alex Albon, or it ends with Sebastian Vettel, and that you can, and especially because so much of their lives is. Have to be groomed, or you know what I mean? It has to be like I don't want to use the word politically correct. That's not the right word, but any conversation, I can't just call my boss up and go, listen here, jerk face, right? That's not how I can approach that conversation. And so I think they have to be the same way with so many things in a way that I don't have to, right?
Yeah, right.
Because I certainly can go to my coworkers like, oh my God, this guy, right? And that might be okay. But he can't do that, and he can't do that in front of the media, and he can't, I just think that, you'd have to have somebody that you can just be purely yourself in that pure moment and know that they're not going to take that somewhere outside of that room. Yeah, it's very valuable to have.
I agree. All right. Let's see, moving on. Let's talk about the regulation changes. So
I feel like we're going to soon need like the little onomatopoeias, pows, like if you're going to use the Batman music, right?
Baff. Yeah, I agree.
There you go.
Let's see, 2022 regulation changes. I wrote an editorial piece this week on that. With the new year comes a new set of regulations, a new
Yay.
era in Formula One, larger wheels, reduced aerodynamic downforce, increased weight, possibly slower cars. It's going to usher in a new era of cost caps to reduce the money spent by teams. The big question is, will it all work? It remains to be seen. Look, I was a little bit flummoxed when Liberty Media bought Formula One and then announced that they hired Ross Brawn to assemble a team to really dig into the technical side of F1 in order to improve the series. Now, at first blush, I thought they were talking about, in sporting terms, generic sporting terms, but it quickly became obvious that this working group was focused on the regulations, car design, cost caps, engine formulas, everything. Else, right?
Right.
And you can go back and listen to the podcast a couple of years ago. Grace, you and I at the time, I talked about it. You talked about it on the podcast, and we thought, no, wait a minute. Isn't that the job of the FIA? And shouldn't there remain a line between the commercial rights holder and the governing body? And why is the commercial owner rewriting all the technical regulations and engine formulas when that's the FIA's job? I mean, that would never have happened under Max Mosley's reign, for sure, right? So I was promptly reminded at the time to shut up because Ross Brawn has pedigree and the series needs more passing, right? That's what I was told. But first, let me address the first thing. As a Ferrari fan, I know Ross's pedigree. Okay. I know it very well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're a Mercedes fan, by the way, or a fan of the hybrid engine, then you're currently enjoying his handiwork as well as Toto Wolff. Okay. So I'm very aware of that. His credentials aren't being questioned in my inquiry. What was being questioned was the FIA's role in governing the sport that it is legally obligated to govern. Right. So regardless, now, we head into 2022 with this new set of regulations. Will the Brawn model for F1 work now that it's been completed and he's handed over all the speculations to the FIA for governance? Also, with the new FIA president, could he see things differently or not be as excited about the commercial rights holder being so involved in the FIA's main job, or would he want immediate changes to these regulations that we're getting ready to roll out in 22, right? So I got to thinking about this in the editorial, and I was thinking, in the end, I've never been one of those clamoring for prolific passing in Formula One because that isn't this kind of motorsport.
Right.
I've also never demanded that any team on any given Sunday could possibly win a race. That's completely unrealistic on many, many levels. All right. What I do think is that the new regulations will work in full in some areas and in part in others. And that's pretty typical. The cars may make less turbulent air, allowing other cars to follow more with more alacrity, and that would be great. But perhaps the bigger impact, I think, is going to be the cost cap and how it neuters the teams in their development cycles. This, I think, is going to be fertile ground or ground zero for allegations of possible litigation or infringement, et cetera, as teams push the margins and try to develop beyond their cost cap, if possible, right?
Especially because reviewing the books happens after the season ends.
Yeah, right.
Right. I think that's the other thing too, is that when you put a new squiggly uppity bit on your car, right? I can go, hey, Michael Massey, if I happen to put that squiggly bit that you see on Mercedes over there, would I be in trouble? Right. So you can ask these kind of questions because that's something we can see, right?
Right.
Now, none of us get to see their books. And so when their books are audited, somebody has to solve this problem. But it's after. So what happens if you, I'll just say, cooked your books or did something you weren't supposed to? What do we do now that it's 2023 and that made you really successful in 2022? I don't know how that's going to work, but that has to be a problem that I can't imagine, I would hope, that they aren't just going to wait until something happens and we find out in 2023 something was wrong in somebody's books and we go, well, now we have to come up with the rest of the rules, right?
Right.
because Formula One is, I mean, all sports and maybe all life, but I'll just leave it at all sports. It's all about skirting the rules, right? Like, I was thinking of Fernando Alonso when he was like, I'm just going to drive through the first turn, right? Because they didn't say I couldn't, right?
Right.
So, I mean, that was kind of humorous, but it's that idea. Or like, Max Verstappen, like, well, I pushed him off the track, but I didn't leave the track, right?
Right.
So it's it's always about pushing it. What squiggly bit might be in the rules or might not be in the rules.
Right.
So why would this be any different? It's not. They're always going to be trying to find ways to push and exploit, because if you aren't, your neighbor is, right? So
Right.
that's always a part of the game in this sport and in many sports. So you're always trying to find that.
And the longer a set of regulations remains in place, the more stable the costs become, the more stable and understandable the science and technology becomes, and the closer the teams actually get to each other, competitively speaking. So if these regulations don't fire on all cylinders straight off, they'll need adjustments to fine tune the series. I mean, that's normal. That happens. What could throw a little bit of a wrench in the works is if the new FIA president wants sweeping changes again. And this would be a very difficult situation for the teams, because they're caught with the cost caps. Teams are investing well ahead of revenue, folks.
Right.
And making big changes regularly is a very big ask of the FIA to put on these teams, because they're investing way ahead of revenue, and they're looking at a longer term. Making the cars smaller with less downforce, less expensive to create, is something I feel like that needs to happen. Changing the regulations frequently is not something I'm in favor of. In fact, I think the regulations should be used, or at least viewed, in like 5-year segments, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that would allow the teams to know where they are and how to budget for car development going forward. But if, like I said, if the new regulations aren't hitting out of the park initially, then changes will be needed to help them work better. They'll have to evolve the regulation set so they're effective. And if that isn't possible, then you may have to look at more drastic measures quicker. But either way, Grace, at the end of the day, isn't the people making that decision, shouldn't that be the FIA? And while Jean Todt seemed more than happy to allow F1 to wrest a large portion of his organization's duties away from him, I'm not sure if the new president will see it that way. So watch this space, because there's also, I've seen several articles now saying that Russ Braun and Pat Simmons and all the team that were all assembled working for F1, they're all leaving F1 now that their job is done. Right. So I guess truly, okay, so now it would be in the hands of the FIA to fine tune or tweak or do whatever they got to do.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do think, maybe because we're recording on a Sunday, and so I was watching football, and I was thinking, yes, the rules should start with the FIA, but again, in football, the owners still have some say, right? So once the rules it's not like the referees all get together and they come up with the rules and then they tell the owners, like, too bad, this is what we're doing today.
Right.
The owners do have input in it. And so if you think of the owners are like Liberty Media, right? There is some interaction there between the rulemaking, and especially because somebody like Goodell works for the owners. He doesn't work for, the players. So I think that while they shouldn't just be totally, intermingled as, the commercial rights holders and the rule makers, there is some relationship between there. It is never just the FIA that makes the rules, or just the commercial rights holders.
Well, I think everyone would have an opinion on it, and I think the FIA would take their opinion legitimately, but I think ultimately they would have the final say.
I do think that Formula One does, you're right, I don't know who gets the final say, but I do think that Formula One is trickier than football in this sense that it's a lot of money. And if the teams aren't happy, especially now that we have manufacturers that we're dealing with, and not, it's not the football is still like, I got to get $70. I already bought a bunch of yachts. I'll buy a football team, right? Like, it's not how Formula One works. And so I think that makes it always a sticky wicket, because if Renault or, Mercedes doesn't like where this is going, they'll leave. And then what are you left with? So I think, I think we often complain about, and rightly so, I'm fine with that, right? Like, that's part of our job as, armchair podcasters is to complain about this, but the manufacturers have a lot of say so. And so that's always going to drive the way the rules go, because the manufacturers pull out, what do we have? There's just not the ability of of some gazillion-dollar playboy just rolling in with some dough and running a team.
Right. Well, watch this space as we head into this year, see how the regulations work.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Don't lose your mind if it has hiccups in the first year. They'll have to address them. They'll have to change them.
I think
they'll have to tweak them, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
No, and I think that it will be, again, we've all worked I assume we've worked enough that whether you're in school or in a job where there's been an org change or something, there's always some fine tweaking to whatever your master vision is, especially as something on this size, right? So it's going to take them a bit, and somebody will figure something out and something will be made illegal, or, it will take a little sorting, but I think that's kind of what makes the new rules interesting. Like, I think it'll be interesting that we're already able to see, because they are after Abu Dhabi, they were running, potential new cars, and we'll see them when testing starts in a month or so, what those new cars are going to look like in comparison to the car that we saw, the like F1, dummy car. I can't remember what they called it, right? Like that everyone's like, I just always remember there's that picture of George Russell, and he's like, ooh, look at this. It's like he always looks like he's in a magazine, right? Like, I don't know how he does it, but he always is posting like, look guys at this car, right? So and they're checking it out, and that people had like, differing opinions about whether they liked it or not. It'll be interesting to see having that car and then seeing what McLaren does versus what Red Bull does versus what
all the
AlphaTauri does. So
I think Mercedes said, I know everybody's seen pictures of the FIA's concept of this, but ours is not going to look a lot like that.
No, right? I think that's going to be really interesting.
It should
I do think everybody should use the shiny livery that they use. I was gonna say wallpaper, but right, like it had that like shiny silver. I think everybody should just use that in their team color, like shiny green for Aston Martin, or we need more shiny in the teams, but
less matte finish, more shiny. Yeah,
exactly. And so I think the rules will be interesting. I do think it is going to change things up, and I think especially again those first 3 or 4 races, because again, I don't know with this calendar I don't know if Italy is where we're going to see the changes, or if it's going to still be Catalunya where we see the upgrades. But wherever that first set of upgrades really happen is going to be really interesting to see what the teams, what they bring, what happens after those first 3 to 5 races. And
well, I don't know, it could change, but it used to be the first upgrade. They were always at
Barcelona.
Right. Yep. Because that was the first European race, but now Imola, there's a race in Italy, right? That's earlier in the season. So, I'm going to have, this is just like with McLaren, that I finally have just called them McLaren, and then they went back to being McLaren Mercedes. Come on, people. My memory's not that good, right? So they're going to go back to the old calendar, just as I have memorized these like wackadoodle last 3 seasons where it's been who knows what any given race week, but
I know
it will be.
It'll
so
be
I think that Sam Collins is going to be very busy, as will Craig Scarborough, drawing his pictures and helping us understand what's going on. But I think that to me is what makes a rule change interesting, and to see how the teams deal with it. But I did also want to say, okay, so there are people that think there's not enough passing in Formula 1, but I do think there's a difference between like, this isn't NASCAR, there shouldn't be that much passing, but I think now we have so little passing, right? So I think, right, if the scale, it's a visual, I know that people can't see, but if on my right side is like 100 passes and on my left side is 0 passes, we want to, it doesn't have to be at 100 passes, but 0 isn't working either. So we want something that gives us a little more passing, but not like 100 passes. That's too much. And the ability to do it. And I think that's the same thing with the, I talked about this last week, that it's not that on any given Sunday, anybody should be that's not true in any sport. There's no sport where that's true, that any team could be on top in that manner. You always have dominance of teams. And I just to think that AlphaTauri is suddenly going to win a race, and it's not because everybody else fell off the island.
Well, they
It's
actually
just not
might.
going to happen.
Haas,
They
yeah.
not so much, but winning one race or getting on the podium. So I think you always have to be realistic about what your performance is going to be in any given year. But I think all I want is a whole lot of passing. I don't think that's realistic. I agree. I think more passing and more opportunities. Maybe that's a better way to clarify it. We want more opportunities for passing.
Yeah.
Right now, I think there's very limited opportunities.
I went less constructs.
Yeah. And
not a fan of DRS.
Yeah. And so we want more real opportunities for passing. How's that?
Right.
And we just want some parity. We just want the idea that people can improve and people can get worse, which we haven't seen necessarily. It's been the same teams week in and week out, Verhan bought this week, or is it, like a little more, know, in that top 3, that top 5 would be really interesting, or to be able to see a team progress throughout the season. Or maybe this will be the year Force India does it. I don't know. Something.
Alonso 08. Well, this is we'll see. This is supposed to do that, but all right. So let's look at what do we got here? Oh, Bernie, former F1 owner, one Bernard Ecclestone, says that Mercedes missed the strategy call in Abu Dhabi. At this point,
where have you been, Bernie?
I know. At this point in the proceedings, folks, I've seen just about every F1 pundit and every F1 fan and every F1 YouTube channel, everything, and every content creator, F1 content creator out there going over every single frame by frame of the final lap in Abu Dhabi like this Zapruder film. And, there's still, and yet having such scrutiny, there's still more room for advice, and that comes from the former owner of Formula One, Bernie Ecclestone. Ecclestone was asked by Swiss outlet Blick whether Mercedes could have, quote, radioed to Bottas to let the car coast because they want to preserve the engine, end quote.
Okay.
They said that would have most likely meant that the safety car stayed out and the race would have finished under those conditions. Hamilton would have won the title. Ecclestone said, pretty clever. I thought of that too. And it would have been idea to make sure that the safety car stayed out and the race wouldn't have restarted. Many people would have been upset, but there wouldn't have been any changes to the final result. End quote. So,
okay.
I think you're in trouble with that theory. There's no reason to save the engine on the final race. It was the last race, and I think the FIA would have taken a very dim view of the matter if they would have checked the data, which they do, and seen that there was really no legit reason to stop him on track. That's what happened at Schumacher with Schumacher at Rascas, and many believe the same thing happened with Nico at Mirabeau. You could have, I think you would have had complete outrage from the other side, akin to Fernando and Renault's crash gate.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Had they done that.
This is like passive crash gate or like,
yeah.
Right? Slow-mo crash gate or something like that, right? Like, no, that's not okay. That's
right.
not how this
It
works.
wouldn't have well. Bernie also said he spoke to Lewis's dad, Anthony, after Abu Dhabi, and after that conversation, Bernie said, I don't think he's going to come back. I think he will not race next year. His disappointment in Abu Dhabi was too great, and I understand him. Now, tied for 7 titles with Michael Schumacher, it's the perfect time for him to fulfill his dream to be a fashion entrepreneur, end quote. This is classic Bernie. It's just classic Bernie. Now, one side, you can get really upset at Bernie's comment there. And you can say, oh, you're just saying that because you want to retire and you don't want anybody to beat Michael and blah, 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 blah. But you got to understand Bernie, man. The little quip about, it's a perfect time because now he can fulfill his dream of being a fashion entrepreneur. He's goading Lewis. He's baiting Lewis.
That is the right word. Goading is the right word.
That's what he's doing. He's not belittling or demeaning Lewis, and he's not actually, I think, saying that he's not going to race. What he's doing is he's trying to light a little bit of fire under Lewis. Yeah. And get Lewis fired up to come back.
I don't think Lewis
Bernie.
cares what Bernie thinks, but yes,
Oh,
I
I
think
doubt
that's
it.
what Bernie is trying to do, right? I think that
Yeah.
it's a strategy to it's kind of like some people, coaches should be, hard on their players or something. That's what
Right,
motivates them,
right.
right? Like, I think this is some sort of like coach speak for like, if I say this to him, that'll motivate him to do better. Whether or not it will or not, that's another thing. But I think you're right. I think Bernie thinks like goading people like this is a strategy and it's successful. I don't think Lewis cares, but
Probably not.
no, and I don't know that really is an effective strategy for most people, but I see this as, I agree with you. I see it as very much like lighting a fire in your butt. Make a decision, man. We're pushing you forward.
come
It's
on,
kind of
man.
like the old school coaching logic that I don't know.
Yeah.
It doesn't really, I don't think it
Yeah.
goes anywhere, but it's Bernie, whatever.
It's
Whatever.
Bernie. What is he, 90 something?
I
you
don't
know?
know.
So
The guy still,
right.
I don't know. He's still, I don't think he's ever, I think they're just going to make him like Futurama and he's going to be like Nixon's head. And we're just going to take him around everywhere, right? Like, I don't see how we'll never not have
It's like
Bernie.
Weekend at Bernie's.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem like that's ever going to happen. It will, and
Right.
and that'll
Are
happen.
you sure?
But I don't. That's what I'm saying. I think Nixon's head will just take him around everywhere, and
It's like Walt Disney's head, man. They froze it.
I don't know, Bernie.
All right.
It's something. He could
Shall
just write. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say he should just write these things down on like pieces of paper, and then people can just pick them out, or like Mad Libs with Bernie quotes or something like that. So he lives on.
It's a good. Let's see what. It's right here. This book here. That's Bernie's a book about Bernie. It's a good read, actually. Yeah. To get into the mindset. All right, let's do some Albin's Cats. Yes, it's that time. It's Grace's favorite segment, Albin's Cats. People, Albin's Cats. Remind people, Grace, why we called it Albin's Cats.
Okay, I will. But first, I'm going to actually say, I think the other thing with Bernie is that it's hard to read his quotes.
Yes.
I think if you hear his quotes, it makes sense. His goading makes sense. What he's trying to say, you get it in his tone. I think reading it, it just seems flat and you're just like, you're a jerk. I mean, he may still be a jerk, but I think it's lost because you're reading it, right? Okay, anyway, I blame the journalist for that. So Albon Cats is because there was a tweet that somebody had sent that they can't remember who won the race, and Monza in 1978, but they do know the names of all of Albon's cats. And so I feel that as that person that can't remember any of that stuff, is that we, I feel like we need like Tony Reale from PTI to tell me all the things that I've missed at the end of every podcast, because certainly I have. And I don't know if people realize that, we kind of do this, live to tape, if you will. There's no editing of it. There's no going back and like, oh, I messed that thing up. Let's fix that, right? It's what we say is what gets recorded. So, and sometimes, surprise, my memory fails me. So I just found that quote I felt very seen by that quote as somebody who can remember none of this sort of like anorak, knowledge that people have about things. And I'm just like, I don't know, but did you see that cute picture of,
Albin's Cats?
About Albin's Cats today. So
there you go. So fun things that orbit the world of Formula One that we see during the week that we wanted to talk about. So I'm going to start because there's one thing, as you probably can assume, is that doing a podcast, I do read a lot of headlines, right?
Yes.
And I have big RSS readers, and I pull in all kinds of RSS feeds and screen grabs, and I see all kinds of headlines and all kinds of news from multiple sources around the world. And it, over the years, has been interesting to watch headlines go from quite a while ago, very professional AP style headlines into then, as AP started themselves to change their style and their style book, then you could see that sort of change. Now to the advent of AP style for the journalists, but the bloggers, and so now, and I count myself among them, but to it's completely out the window. The headlines are hilarious. And I always find it interesting that either the writer or the editor, all the time they put in or not, to come up with the headline and edit the headline. So I thought I'm going to come up with a segment for Alvin's Cat called Todd's No Shit Headlines. Pardon the French.
I
can't think of a better name for it. I'm sorry, but it's kind of what it is.
I think anything else wouldn't do it justice.
Yeah,
I think
it's
sometimes a well-placed curse word is what you need.
Yeah, sometimes, I could say a no duh.
No, that sounds good.
Yeah, I
Not
think a no shit headline. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have a few of them for you to enjoy.
Okay.
These are just headlines from articles in like they could be at motorsport.com. They could be at the Daily Express, Mail, Guardian, New York Times, whatever. These are just headlines. All right, that's all I'm reading. I'm not reading the articles. First headline: 50 things you didn't know about Formula E.
There are 50 things to know about Formula E.
50?
It's electric.
I mean, not 5. You couldn't ease me. You couldn't wade me into the series on the top 10 things you didn't know. You got to go to the jugular and go 50 damn things. I'm going to guarantee you there's 45 of them damn things I don't care to know.
Can I come up with 50 things about anything? I
don't know that I could come up with 50 things you didn't know about Formula One.
Right, but I'm thinking like, I don't know if I could come up with like 50 things you don't know about me. And I
don't know.
I'm going to think that
50?
I know the most about myself is a good topic. I don't know. I think that's such a.
I mean, why didn't they just say, here's our manifesto on why you should watch Formula E? I mean, it was crazy. And I had to go to the link in the description even to get there to see those. It's like, no thanks.
Are they all just going to be like 45 of them or some version of It's Electric?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know either. I don't know.
Oh, there you go. I thought that was
fun.
I'm
fascinated to just see what how they came up with 50. That's a lot.
No thanks. That's one of those headlines that when you read it, they've overdone it so much that when somebody said 50 things, I don't have time to go through 50 things. If they just said 5 things, I would have probably read that. But 50, I don't have time for that. You cut your own throat on that one. All right, so here we go. Next one. Mazepin feels ready to fight in the F1 midfield.
He does?
Really?
Has he been to the midfield?
Does the team or his car, do they feel equally as ready? I mean, I'm just saying.
He does have a fastest lap this season, Todd. I don't know why you're being so critical of him.
Yeah. Well, that's right. He does. Yeah. Speaking of Haas, Gunther Steiner, here's a headline from him this week. Haas crew never gave up in tough 2021 F1 season.
For what?
Okay.
Gave up what? I mean, they all showed up to work, right?
Gave up their job? Gave up their, I don't know what, their benefits?
They knew what they were getting into.
They didn't give up their toasters? What?
I don't know. They didn't give up being last? I don't know. What didn't they give up on?
I don't know. They just never gave up.
They never gave up fighting.
Right. This next one's a good one. Okay. Aston Martin hails brilliant Vettel for integrity and integration. First of all, I do love the fact that, if you're new to Formula One, this won't make a lot of sense to you, and I apologize. But for you veterans out there, you know this because you were dogpiling him. He went from the most hated driver in Formula One. Can't do crap. He can't pass. He sucks. Everyone hated him. He was a stupid German. Blah, blah, all this stuff. Now,
I just said he could
love him. He's the darling of the entire pit lane right now. I don't know what changed and why you went from calling him a no talent ass clown to he's the most complete full. What happened? Right.
Well,
I have no idea.
I think that he stopped being a no talent ass clown. He's not at Ferrari anymore.
Maybe.
And he's the elder statesman now, right? Like that's
maybe when I was doing those hot laps with him a few years ago, I've done a couple of those with him. I talked to him, spent time. A super nice guy, good guy. Yeah. And I was saying it back then, and I was taking all kinds of incoming mortar fire over that.
I think
I don't know. Now
it's narrative. It's all narrative.
It is. Yeah, I think it's bullshit. So anyway.
You went from
take the person for who the person is. Stop
But I
it.
think he's changed. I think that he really, I guess that's why I was joking that I guess I have to like Max Verstappen now too, because I think Max Verstappen's narrative is very similar to how Vettel's was when he was at Red Bull at that age, right? Some of it is that age, some of it is Red Bull, right? And so he's not 18 anymore. And so now he's not as like, look at all these cheeky things I can do, which didn't really help his narrative, in my opinion. And now he's just like, yeah, I'm a dude. I got kids. I live my life. I pick up trash. It's just his own life, just like all of us have changed between when we were, I hope I've changed between 18 and 43, right? So it is reasonable to expect that as a human being, he has also changed between 18 and 38 or however old he is now. So I don't think he's that old.
And by the way, it's nice to know that he's brilliant and for integrity and introspection. I don't know exactly. It almost sounds like he's apart from the Acme gearbox company.
Yeah,
like it integrated really well into the car. So I thought you hired him to win races.
Exactly. And I wonder, I mean, every job you have a performance evaluation, right? And the thing is how do you quantify
integrity? Integrated.
Yeah. Right. So it's like
you're integrated.
Right. So it's easy when it's something like, publish 2 journal articles or read 7 books or whatever. Those are really easy things to quantify. But how do you quantify he's been integrated into something on his performance evaluation?
Grace, I'd like to see you more integrated with the office.
I don't know what that means. I don't know how do you. First of all, I am. Second of all, because I'm the party planner. So
yeah, okay.
There you go. Always integrated. Right. But I don't know. I don't know what that means.
All right. So Mr. Capito over at Williams, this headline says, no number 1 driver at Williams in 22.
Yeah, because really? Lewis isn't racing for you, is
he? Yeah, you're right. There is no number 1 driver. There's number 19 and number 20. You're right. No shit.
That was like
is it Zhao? Zhou.
Guan Yu Zhou?
Yes.
Yeah.
It says Guan Yu Zhou is the trailblazer that will put China on the F1 map. Really?
Haven't they been on the map?
You mean that whole failed actual Grand Prix that they built a bespoke track for? That didn't do it, but this kid will? Okay. Interesting.
I think people are grasping there. Yeah, I think they're just trying to come up with a headline.
Yeah, I don't think so. Nothing against Guan Yu, but it's, yeah.
Well, they have nothing else.
What you should be doing is piping in that Drive to Survive.
Netflix are real bunch, aren't they?
And then over to China, you got to, do the closed caption and stuff. But then all of a sudden, all of China will be followed. Also, let's see. Nico Rosberg reveals, doesn't say, he reveals Lewis Hamilton's title defeat by Max Verstappen caused him, quote, incredible pain.
It caused Nico Rosberg pain?
Yeah. Really?
Okay. I file this under Bernie Ecclestone. I mean, yeah, Nico Rosberg is still out there. He's still a content creator.
I don't know.
Why do I
am
care?
I the only one that feels like we're getting almost to a Nico Rosberg saturation level?
Oh, I think we've been saturated with Nico Rosberg for a while now.
He's like everywhere. And he went on his YouTube thing and had this real puff piece for Max, and everybody went ballistic on him. And then he kind of backpedaled. I mean, see, the thing is, Nico, when you're friends with everyone, you're friends with no one. And when you sit on the middle of the fence, you're not on anyone's side, right? And it's very difficult to run that line. And yeah, I think it's I don't know, boy. I just feel like I've had Nico rammed up my backside so far I can taste him at this point. But no offense, I like Nico, but
that's a visual I don't need. But
yeah, I know it's brutal. But this is no shit headline, so
I don't. Why is that a headline? I don't know.
Well, he's saying that, he felt bad for the team. It's his old team.
Who didn't?
He felt, and I was thinking, the whole time I'm reading it, Nico, has some context. How do you think Lewis felt?
I don't know.
I mean, I know you had incredible pain, but I think Lewis wanted to rip somebody's head off.
Maybe,
You know?
so we used to joke about how like Jackie Stewart was always the Renna quote. Maybe this
Yeah.
isn't Nico Rosberg is now
I
that
think
like
you're right.
I think they just go to Nico Rosberg
I
for
think
everything.
you're right. I think it was a toss up between him and Julian Palmer.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Julian Palmer is everywhere too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was like I think it was a toss up, but I think here we are. I think maybe Nico's going to move into the lead on that role.
I think so. Maybe.
Let's see. And finally on my list is, quote, my best days, I'm unbeatable, end quote. Bottas just needed more of them. Zing. I didn't even have to say that. I didn't even have to say that. That was via Beer Matt over at the race. Sorry, Matt. I know your name's Matt Beer, but anyway, I like saying Beer Matt because
Beer Matt is funny.
it's somewhere in the world there is a product that you can buy called a Beer Mat. There's got to be. And I just love that about you. So anyway, over at the race, that was the headline. It was my best days, I'm unbeatable, end quote. And it says, Bottas just needed more of them. And he did say that. Bottas, in fairness, Valtteri said, I just needed more of those days. So,
well, that's a headline.
Yeah, it comes across as like Matt's taking a pretty big swipe at him, but he's not, because Valtteri actually said that. Matt's just, quoting. But anyway.
I mean, but I'm sure that's not the only thing he said, right? I mean,
no. He had a lot more. No, he had a lot more. But this is not the fun of it. See, the fun of it isn't to read the whole article.
No.
The fun of it is to see just the headline, because
yeah,
everyone that has heard one of these headlines, but you read the actual story, you'll know that me just reading the headline makes it sound one way.
Yeah.
But the article really does explain what the headline, But in this world of social media and drive-by headlines, that's all we get these days is just headlines. So I think it's funny just to read the headlines.
Yeah, no, you're right. And more than once I've read an article, like that would be a good example of it, that I would read it and go, well, oh man, clickbait.
Yeah.
Like, that's not what I thought that article was going to be about at all. Darn it, I fell for it.
Right.
Yeah. I needed to suck a little less, Valtteri Bottas.
That's it, man. All right, let's do some mailbag.
You've got mail.
We've got some mail. First up,
All right.
Connor asks, does it make sense from a cost cap going forward to alternate power unit and car regulation changes to keep costs down while trying to draw in new power unit manufacturers and teams? So he said this is given that in 2022, the regulations is freezing power unit development, but the 22 regulations is allowing for new chassis development. So typically what happens, Connor, is that in the past, and I'm going to try to condense this, in the past, Formula One would come up with an engine formula. So it would be a 1 point something liter. It'd be a 2 point or, a 5 liter, 6 liter, whatever it was. So they would come up with an engine formula. And that was really Formula One, the top formula, the number one formula of engine. And so that engine was back when engines were pretty much most of the equation, right? Because there wasn't aerodynamics and all that. Chassis were important, but the engine formula is what sort of determined the series. And there was the formula for Formula One, and then lower formula engines for the junior series. And so then everyone would build a chassis around that engine formula, meaning that the teams like Ferrari would build that engine formula. And so I'm just going to pick a number. I'm not saying this is a formula or not. Let's just say it was a 1.8 liter. So they would build a 1.8 liter engine, whether it was 6-cylinder, 8-cylinder, 10-cylinder, whatever it was. And then they would build their chassis around the engine design that they made, right? So part of this is in freezing the engine technology, it's a known engine, the weight, the design, the mounting points, everything about those engines is already known, okay?
Right.
So the chassis now can be the main focus of development. And you bring up a really good point. can you freeze the one? Well, that's traditionally how this series is operated. They'll come up with an engine formula. That formula is frozen. That's the formula. Now, over time, they used to let them develop those engines year on year, but it still had to be this formula, this many liters, this much horsepower, et cetera, et cetera. Then they started putting restrictions on the amount of horsepower you could generate, and teams took more and more advantage, and it got really out of control. And so even with the hybrids now, they're astronomically expensive to develop. And so what they're trying to do is that the longer a formula around an engine lasts, the more parity you start to get as time marches on and engine development marches on incrementally over year on year, right? So you start to get development. Now, all around that, for let's call it 5 years of frozen engine formula, all around that, the chassis may develop. They may come out with wider wings, less wide wings, more barge boards, less barge boards. The rear wing mounting pylons have to be this. The diffusers have to be this height. They can make all kinds of chassis regulations, adjustments all around that chassis over that 5 years, but the engine remains the same, so the mounting points remain the same. The weight, it is a stress-bearing element of the car, the engine is. So all of that plays into the design. So to your point, it's important. Now, there is a challenge here that if there were a new direction that a chassis or engine regulation would move toward, the limiting factor could be the part that is frozen, like the engine or the chassis. In this case, let's say the engine, meaning that the two evolve hand in hand. For example, if you built a chassis and then froze it, but then you came out with a new engine, and the new engine was a smaller engine formula, it would have to be bolted on to the older chassis. And as it's a stress part of the car, this would make it really, really difficult to do a newer, smaller, lighter weight, different design engine, retroing it onto an older chassis to try to make that fit. You can think of McLaren a couple years ago. They had to figure out how to bolt that Mercedes engine on the back of their car that was previously made for another engine manufacturer, right? So you've got a lot of those details around the series, but your main premise is correct in that the formula is chosen for the engine, and they tend, or in the past anyway, those regulations would tend to last 3 or 4 or 5 years, whatever it was, and then they would make a change. So there you have it. I hope that answers your question. Hope so. Okay, let's move on, shall we, Grace?
Sure.
Okay. Let's do it. Corin asks, I've heard a lot of other podcasters hating on Charles Leclerc. Can you shed any light into why you think that might be? Ferrari is my team too, and Charles is my guy, plus George at Merck, because who can't root for that? Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
And I always find it interesting how much hate Charles gets. I'd love to know what other F1 podcasts you listen to also. He says he got a lot of friends into Formula One for Drive to Survive and sends them over to our podcast. Well, Corin,
thanks.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Appreciate that. Yes.
Welcome, Corin's friends.
Hello, Corin's friends.
Yay.
Yes. Hey. You buy Corin a beer or whatever Corin likes.
Right. Something.
Okay. So, how do I? Okay. So, I haven't seen the Charles hate. Like you talk about, if there is a lot, I think it's a bit misplaced, if you ask me.
Yeah.
You could argue that Carlos was, on balance of this season and in the points, the better driver, but he's been in the sport longer than Charles has. And I would have expected him to do well, right? I would have expected Carlos to do that.
Yeah.
As for Charles, he's honing his racecraft at a top team, right? And the pressure for anyone, not just Charles, anyone who decides to drive for Ferrari, that pressure is immense. And every single driver that's ever driven for Ferrari can tell you that the Italian pressure, the Tifosi, is immense, okay? And I think Charles is also aggressive, like Max. And some people like that and some don't. And I think we've seen enough of Charles, though, to know that he absolutely is in the league with Lando, Max, Pierre, George, and the younger drivers, and has the pace and talent to win races for sure, if not championships. The key point here is seeing if Ferrari could give him a car to win races and titles, right? Now, having said all that, I would agree that I think 21 was a bit of a ragged year for Charles. And I think there were times when he was trying too hard to make something out of a car that had very little interest in doing what it was he was asking it to do. And I think he was trying to make something happen and, maybe got a little out over his skis in that sense. But I think that's... yeah, I think if there's a ton of hate about Charles, I don't know exactly what that would be. I think it's misplaced. I think he's absolutely on it. He's an incredibly exciting young driver, just like George, just like Lando, Max, all of them, and Carlos for that matter. I think he's right there with them. Also, on your question about other podcasts, I honestly, Corin, I simply don't have time to listen to other podcasts. I wish I did. Every once in a while, I'll catch one of those F1.com's interviews that they may do. After races, I try to squeeze in Ted's Notebook. But usually, I end up reading more than listening due to my day job taking the majority of my time. So I really don't have a chance to listen to a lot of F1 podcasts. So there you go. Have you seen all the hate about Charles?
No, I was wondering that too. I was like, I think so. Again, I think it's narrative. I do think there are people that hate that he's from Monaco. I think that's always just going to get you some haterade, right? And he's French, right? It's right. So I think there's some of that he's always going to have to deal with. I do think he's at Ferrari, so that's always going to be. You're always going to get love, like you're saying from the Tifosi. Like you're always going to get a certain amount of love and a certain amount of hate because you're a Ferrari driver, right? And somebody who struggles with that. But I haven't seen a lot of Charles Leclerc hate. I think it's just the opposite. I think most, and maybe this is the difference too, right? I think there is a difference between, professional F1 journalists or people who are around the sport always speak very highly of Charles Leclerc, as opposed to like people like you or I who do these podcasts that don't necessarily, or are tweeting or whatever, that don't necessarily have like personal interactions with Leclerc or the team. Right. I'm not at the races, right? So I think, and I think that's the other thing to address the idea of what to listen to. I mean, I tend to listen much more to professional podcasts if I do. I honestly listen to more MotoGP podcasts than I do Formula One podcasts. But, there's also an explosion of a lot of things. And I tend to watch more on YouTube, like post-race, especially because here in the United States, it's like the race started and the race ended and that was it, right? You don't, we get the pre-race, but especially when the race ends, it's like, and that's it. Sometimes we don't get the podium. So I think that I watch a lot more content on YouTube as opposed to listening to podcasts. But I listen to the Race Has a MotoGP podcast that I listen to. So, so I think neither the
who does that? Matt Oxley or somebody?
Yeah. So I think, and Toby Moody. Yeah.
Yep.
I think that there isn't in the professional world of the like real people that do this job, I don't see that Charles Leclerc hate. So I'm not sure where that comes from.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think, as you said, I think as with everything, it's hard to separate what is the team versus what is the driver. I think that's always a difficulty in the sport. I mean, there's that difficulty in every sport that, you can be a player on a team and that team sucks. And so then it's hard for you to really stand out. But I think in Formula One, especially since the car is a bigger factor than the driver, that's just the nature of the beast. And so I think that Ferrari having a bad season means Charles Leclerc is going to have a bad season. I see Fernando Alonso at McLaren, right? So, so I don't know where that comes from either. And
I don't know. I'll have to keep my eye out. He also asked another question, or she, I don't, Corin, I'm assuming it's he, I don't know. I'd also like to know what do you recommend for newbies into the sport who just can't get enough? I started following F1 during the Australian weekend in 2020 for the race that never happened. I can't get enough. I watch
Yeah.
every race, qualifying, practice, pre and post race coverage. I have 5 different podcasts I like, and will
Wow.
talk to anyone who will listen about F1. Next year,
Yeah.
I plan to do fantasy, but is there anything else true diehard fans are doing I might not know about? My favorite thing about F1 is that there are a limited amount of players to keep track of, and because Drive to Survive, I feel like I know most of them just having watched that. So, good
Right.
point. Yeah, I think. Look, the Drive to Survive series on Netflix.
Netflix are real bunch, aren't they?
It's done a great job. It sort of just only touches the surface of the sport, albeit much more in depth than we've ever had in the past, which is great. And I would recommend certainly watching that. I'd also recommend, if you're new to the sport, getting the F1 TV app so you can go back and watch the older races.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Pick like the 98 and 99 season and watch those races and those fights between Michael Schumacher and Mika Hakkinen. Those seasons were great. And you can pick other ones, like Lewis's first year in the sport in 2007, or even 05 and 06 when Alonso won titles. Those are great. Another fun thing is to pick a team and then trace its history back, like Mercedes and Red Bull. Who were they before they didn't just sprout up out of nowhere.
Right.
They were existing F1 teams that date way back, although some of them all the way back to the 60s. So if you go backwards in time and start looking at their history, who owned them? Who were the drivers that drove for them? He's like, oh crap, Lauda drove for that. Oh wow, I didn't, or whoever,
Yeah.
So that's always good. They all have tremendous legacies to these teams, and that's good. And then also pick a few fun points to research. Like one of my favorites is like everyone talks about Adrian Newey. And Adrian Newey is a musical genius. No, he's an aerodynamic genius. And he's awesome. But who's ever beat Adrian Newey? Well, I can tell you one name, Rory Byrne beat him.
Yes.
So go back and find out the year that Rory Byrne took the engineering war to Adrian Newey and beat him in his own game, and learn a little bit about Rory Byrne and where he came from. That's an interesting story, where he came from, South Africa. And so then you can learn more about Adrian Newey too in the process. So this is just a couple things I have, just suggestions. So
Yeah, and I was thinking too that every team has I'm sure a book, like I think that, as a McLaren fan, I have several of their sort of, they have that collection of books. It's like, here's all our history of the cars, the history of the drivers. I think those kind of compendiums are really interesting if you have a team that you're really into. Because like you said, I think seeing that history in time is always very interesting.
Yeah.
And then
another thing, speaking of that, Grace, I'm trying to remember now. Gosh, this is terrible. Bear with me, folks. I know this is a long podcast, and I'm trying to get out of it.
We're never going to get out of it. It's
I'm
okay.
trying to make this short as possible, but it's a long podcast. But I do.
They're
going to
have a long
here.
commute if they live on the East Coast, so it's fine.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they probably will. David Brigham sent me a message in Patreon, because he's a Patreon supporter. God bless him. And he sent me a message with 2 links. Corin, to a terrific interview of Steve Nichols, who, as it would come out, it wasn't. There was this controversy over Gordon Murray designing the MP44, or was it Steve Nichols? And as this documentary would strongly argue, it was actually Steve Nichols that designed that car, not Gordon Murray, who's been taking credit for it for all these years. So it was a very interesting video. But stuff like that, I think it's important. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
I'll send you the link, Grace. I think you'll like it as a McLaren fan.
I will. I'm looking forward to it.
And it's awesome to see the MP44.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. All right, let's read another one, shall we?
Sure.
Hi, TBF. This is from Tobias. Is 2022 Perez's last year at Red Bull, regardless of how well he does? Is the Red Bull Racing management regarding him as a safe pair of hands until they feel they can put in either Albon or Gasly back in the car? Or is it still in play that a good 22 running close to Max and bringing a Constructors Championship sees him being their guy for the number 2 spot? I don't think Red Bull brought Checo in expecting him to be on Max's level or to fight for the driver's title, but they needed some solidity, and he has given that in a car that is known to be tricky. What say you, Grace?
I say no. I say unless they have, I don't think they're going to bring Albon or Gasly back, unfortunately. I think I would keep Perez. He's what, like 30? He's not, I mean, in racing years, like dog years, right? He's not young, but he's not, right. He's not young, but he's not old, right? He still has plenty of years in him. I think I think he's fit well with the team. I think the team are happy with him. I think he's happy with the team, which I think is more the Albon Gasly problem, right? That it just never worked. I don't think it'll work a second time. So I would keep Perez unless I had somebody else that, my Ocon waiting in the wings or something like that. I would keep Perez. I don't know why you would change that. He seems to work well with Max and does what the team needs him to do for the Constructors Championship.
I agree with you. I find myself, I would have said yes to your question about 22 being the last year until the last race of 21, where he did an amazing job of running blocker for Max, right?
Yeah.
Checo is a terrific driver by anyone's measure. And if he gets on par with Max and starts delivering on Saturday and Sunday, they may struggle to justify letting him go.
Yeah, I think so.
And they may lose Pierre in that case, which I think would be very difficult. And you'd have to make that gamble. Now, the one thing that could make that gamble a reality and find Pierre coming in and taking his place is money. And at the end of the day, the main reason could be money. So time will tell. They pay a lot for Max, and Pierre would be much less expensive than Checo. And Checo will want more money if he's going to bring more points. So the demarc line could be money.
Yes, it could be. I agree with that too. But I think that if that's not a factor, I don't know why they would get rid of Perez. It seems to be working for them.
Right.
And him. Everybody seems happy.
Everyone does, including Max.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's back out of the podcast. That does it for this episode. But be sure to join us next week when Grace and I will talk about other news and shenanigans in the world of Formula One now that the world gets back to work after the holidays.
Right.
But if you are like this podcast, go to iTunes, give us a good rating. You can leave your opinion. Tell us what you think about what we've talked about at theparcferme.com. Just do it with decorum and civility. As always, a huge thank you to all of our Patreon supporters like David out there who are awesome supporting us. And we could not and would not do this podcast without all of you. So if you do not support us through Patreon or PayPal, and we certainly would be honored if you consider doing so. But if you don't want to, then find someone who does and pat them on the back, because they are the reason we exist. So, all right, until next week when we come back to do it all over again, this is Todd, aka Negative Camera, saying so long, Grace.
See you next week.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.